from Ohio's 8th District, Warren Davidson, who I have tremendous respect for. So, Warren, we were talking about the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And I have to say that because now I'm going to call it FISA from here on out. And a lot of people sometimes think I'm talking about Pfizer, which is a pharmaceutical company. So I don't want to get that. But Warren, how did we get FISA and what is it?
Well, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, passed in, I think, 1978 for the first time, 70s era law. And it was written with 70s era tech in mind, traditional wiretaps. And the thinking was that, international phone calls are less protected than, American citizen rights. So foreigners aren't inherently protected. And so this expanded the ability of the government. It's always been, as Ben Franklin summed up, a trade-off between security and liberty. And, the wise person always chooses liberty. And the insecure people, which seems to be a lot, choose security. And so it's been abused. It was already being abused prior to 9/11, but post 9/11, people reacted and kind of rolled that into the Patriot Act and kind of expanded the scope quite a lot. And, that passed overwhelmingly bipartisan fashion. I mean, George W. Bush was president, but I think one, maybe three senators voted against it and 60 some people in the House voted against it. But there were warnings, hey, this isn't going to turn out well. It will be abused, and it certainly has. And it has expiration dates, so it needs to be reauthorized. And that's kind of what we're coming into right now, is a chance to reauthorize it. And then you either let it expire or you reform it. And we'll probably get into why reform is probably the better option.
Yeah, so let's take it from there. You talked about, I don't know how much in the weeds we should get into, but maybe people need to know just a little bit more. It gives authorities to the federal government to, specifically, you can go after foreign actors, right? They're not on U.S. soil, or they're foreign. They don't have the same constitutional rights. But we get to this notion now of we wanted to reform FISA, and the question is why? What has happened to make us feel insecure, and the predictions that were made in the early 2000s post 9/11 when it was added into the Patriot Act, they seem to have come to fruition. So how have they come? What are the abuses that you've seen?
Well, I mean, people started paying attention to it probably maybe most famously when Edward Snowden became a whistleblower or leaker, whichever way people have that debate. But the director of national intelligence, Clapper, had testified before Congress that we don't spy on American citizens. Right. And Edward Snowden said, that's not true. This guy just lied to Congress and collected quite a lot of information. He transmitted that to Julian Assange, who had set up WikiLeaks, which isn't the right way to be a whistleblower for any government folks out there. There is a right way that'll keep you out of trouble. But he also rightly recognized that it would be very dangerous for him to share this information that he had, which is, here's all the ways that the government is spying on U.S. citizens, not just foreign nationals. And so that became very, very widely known, and people kind of suspected it, but he fully confirmed it. And then it got a lot of attention because Donald Trump, as a candidate, said that they're spying on my campaign, and people said, "Oh, that's a conspiracy theory. He's just a paranoid, crazy person." But then when he won and he actually had the power of the office, he started uncovering all the ways that he had been spied on, and come to find out they had even tried to comply in cases with the FISA system of getting warrants. They lied on the warrant application on President Trump. And the problem has been that even in spite of violations of existing law, which are, overly broad, there still hasn't been real accountability for people that violated those laws. So there needs to be a different system. I'll say one other thing. In parallel to this, there's this theory that the Article 2 of the Constitution, which created the executive branch, and really the presidency and everything else derives its power from the power of the presidency, that the president can do whatever is necessary to keep Americans safe. And their argument apparently is including violate the Constitution, which isn't true. but there's things like Executive Order 12,333, where they'll say, oh, we didn't actually use FISA authority to do that. We used executive authority. And so it's really important to rein that in and provide accountability for the only way that the executive branch can do this kind of surveillance is with accountability in conformance with the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great history and reminds us of all this. But I want to add one other thing, that Inspector General Horowitz, who was looking at this, revealed that there were literally, I want to say 4 years ago now, over 3 million illegal queries into U.S. persons' data. And now they got it down to what, like 250,000. And they're like, well, see, we made these improvements, but that's 250,000 illegal queries, Warren.
Yeah, and I love that you use the word they use. They say query, and
Yeah, exactly.
that's totally constitutional. What the Constitution prohibits is searches. See, we're not searching; we're just querying the database. It's a search, right? So, anyone with a thesaurus can double check that. Query is just another word for search, and it's this word weasel too cute crap that we just have to annihilate. And we're not going to do that by completely letting all the authority lapse, because they're not being held to account for the violations using, quote, executive authority. And look, the courts are reluctant to rein in Congress when we do things that are dumb, and they say, well, the House makes its own rules, for example. They're reluctant to rein in the executive branch because everyone gets national security is important. But the reality is, the means can actually turn into its own abuse. And that's clearly what's happened with the spying on U.S. citizens approach that's been underway for more than a generation.
Yeah, so let's get into it. So Warren, for everyone who's watching, Warren has been working for several years on new legislation to reform FISA. And the reason that and he just said it, you can't basically allow it to expire, because if you allow it to expire, we feel like the executive branch is going to abuse it even worse, and we will have less transparency and less ability to hold them accountable. But Warren's been working on this. This is a bipartisan effort, and it's a bicameral effort. We've got senators from both parties. We've got members in the House from both parties. And I think, I sit on the Judiciary Committee. Warren successfully got out of the House Judiciary Committee earlier this year. The Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act. And so before we get into the new bill, the Government Surveillance Reform Act, which I'm calling the Lee, Wyden, Davidson, Lofgren bill, let's talk briefly about the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act, and then why that is important to this bigger reform package, the GSRA.
Yeah, so the Fourth Amendment is the constitutional protection for the right to privacy, right? So the Constitution doesn't give us our rights. It's supposed to protect our rights, and chiefly from government. And so the government is supposed to get a warrant if they want certain information. And what we found is that the government is simply bypassing the warrant obligation. And because so many commercial players are harvesting your own data, your private data, and they're going to data brokers and buying data that they would otherwise have to get a warrant or a subpoena to obtain. So we proposed a bill, and it's a similar coalition. I kind of call it like a radio station, WLWZ, Wyden Lee, or WL. I use my first name. I guess I should use my WLDZ, Wyden Lee Davidson's Lofgren. And I used her Z, Zoe Lofgren from California, but 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. The coalition is far broader, as you are part of this. Sarah Jacobs, a Democrat from California, is part of this. But we've had this kind of coalition of conservatives and progressives that have still believe in civil liberties, at least with respect to privacy. And so we were able to build this coalition, and really unanimously, with one person sort of voting present, get the Fourth Amendment's not for sale. And that was a surprise, because you have some Intel committee members there who have frankly been part of the effort to abuse this in the past. But it was the coalition has continued to grow in the time that you and I have been here.
Yeah. So that's a great bill. And we haven't seen it move beyond that, right? So this bigger bill for more reform of FISA, the Government Surveillance Reform Act. Tell us about that and whether the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act is incorporated into GSRA.
Yeah, so the Fourth Amendment is not for sale is part of the Government Surveillance Reform Act, and there are a couple things that are bills in this lane that aren't part of it. But as we go towards this next reauthorization of FISA, we've got a nice coalition coming together to create a base text, which is great that Chairman Jordan, the chairman of Judiciary, kind of pointed, you, Andy, and a couple others to create a task force to kind of get input from across the House to put as the base text for this bill. And I think there'll be some really good amendments in there. But, what are some of the things that we do? We prevent circumventing the warrant requirement by buying your data, but we also prevent backdoor searches, which is where, you say, oh, well, I just collected this international data. This is where you've got swept up communications and you kind of go for the American because the data is in there with a query first. And then when you found what you're looking for, then you get the search warrant. This is just so bad. And let's see, 702 is a system that uses a court sort of separate from a pure Article 3 court, but a judge nonetheless. It stops reverse targeting. It's it's about collections and just any reference to a certain word, and they'll query that word, but any name that comes up involved with it, then they'll do as much research on the computer as they want, calling it querying. Once they've collected everything that they already know exists and know exactly what they're looking for, then they'll, if they need to, get a search warrant. So it channels a lot of those things. And one of the important things is it limits the federal authority to FISA. So it kind of cuts off this Executive Order 1233 that kind of says you can pretty much do whatever you want since you're just trying to keep everybody safe. That's the Cliff Notes version of Executive Order 12,333.
Right, that's right. Well, it does some other things too. I think you guys, you have the amici process, and that's basically an advocate who will be present to watch out to make sure that if there's a U.S. person being queried or searched, the amici can make sure that there is proper due process involved and take it to court and raise questions, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's an important provision, and one that I don't think is in our bill, but it's a good idea that we've seen, is just limiting the number of people that have access to this information. So there are really no controls around how many people within an agency have access to this. So, anyone at the FBI, anyone at, pretty much if it's got a 3-letter agency behind it, pretty much anyone can get there, including contractors a lot of times. We've tried for years with a basic amendment that just said, hey, surely since you have humans that work there, somebody accesses the data inappropriately. Could you give us a list of who did and what was done? Hey, this guy was new and we clearly didn't train him well enough. Or, hey, this lady, she did something that was inappropriate, so we gave her a disciplinary counseling. Or, hey, this other guy did something that was completely illegal, so we terminated him and we're actually bringing a case against him in court. They won't supply anything, but at least now the Inspector General has shown that it is clearly being accessed inappropriately and on a very big scale.
Yeah, I think most people probably don't realize that when we've done our investigation, working with the Inspector General and actually interviewing the people from the FBI and NSA and those, there's more than 10,000 agents and officers and whatever else you want to call them for these different 3-letter agencies that are querying databases that have American personal data and information in it. More than 10,000. So one of the things, so our task force, I'm on a separate task force, but we're trying to integrate Warren, this Government Surveillance Reform Act that Warren and his colleagues have put together, that I've co-signed onto, try to amalgamate where we can. We've got agreement across the conference in some respects to reduce that, for instance, in the FBI to 53 people, only 53 people. What an improvement that would be, So we'll see how that plays out. But also, we've agreed again across the conference on punishments, both criminal penalties and civil penalties that have to be imposed as you try to hold these people accountable. Why should someone who is criminally abusing with intention to abuse your civil rights, your Fourth Amendment rights and your right to due process, why shouldn't they be held accountable?
Yeah, and I think that's part of what the average American feels so frustrated by. That they know these things are going on, but they also know no one's really being held accountable for it. They feel like they're powerless to change things, and no wonder, because some of us have worked for years, even as members of Congress, the House or the Senate, and we haven't been able to change things. And for a long time, if you weren't on board with the Patriot Act, you're not going to be on the Intel Committee. And even if you're on Judiciary, if you think you got a path to get something fixed, they pull the bill. That's what we had the same kind of coalition several years ago in 2020, and we were going to block the reform then of the 215 business records provision. And Nancy Pelosi was Speaker at that time. She pulled the bill and took the reauthorization to the floor so that she wouldn't be snookered by this conservative progressive coalition in Judiciary. We were going to take over the bill and get real reform. And that's when I sit down with Attorney General Barr and Donald Trump's Attorney General, who's basically saying, well, FISA just limits our authorities. The reality is, under Article 2, we can do whatever we want to keep people safe. And if you let this 215 business records provision lapse, we're just going to keep doing it anyway, but we won't be constrained to the way that you're trying to make us do it under FISA. So that's when I became very clear that we can't just let things expire. We have to rein them in and reform it.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too bogged down in the process of this, but we're trying to get this thing done before December 31st because we don't want it caught up in spending bills. We don't want them trying to just do a clean reauthorization without these important reforms before the end. And I do think that it's analogous to the situation where you have almost 1,500 unauthorized programs, agencies, and departments that we just keep funding anyway, and by doing that, we lose the authority to actually reform those programs, which are duplicative or perhaps corrupt even. But this is such an important thing, Warren. I can't thank you enough for taking leadership on it. I'm going to give you the last word you want to say on FISA reform.
Look, I think privacy is probably the most infringed civil liberty that we have. I wish the average citizen would be as vigilant in defending the Fourth Amendment as we have been on defending the Second. The country's kind of divided on that, but frankly, they're largely just apathy on privacy. People realize that companies are violating their privacy every day. Their data is being harvested, stolen, hacked, everything possible. What they should know is that the government is going to be a defender of their right to privacy, not an abuser of it. And hopefully we can get the country to rally behind this reform.
Well, thanks, Warren. Thanks for leading on this. And we're going to, I've worked with Chairman Jordan. I know you have too. We're hoping to get something done sooner rather than later. I'm optimistic about that, actually. And then I think that if we can get something to the floor, both the House and the Senate, overwhelmingly, you're going to see bipartisan, bicameral support for this. And I think, in our communications with the Biden administration is they know that they're going to have to do something, even if they don't really want to, because that's the mood of the country and the mood of Congress. And so let's do it, man. Let's get her done.
Let's do it.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining us. Join us next time. Hey, Warren, if people want to follow you, find out more about you, how do they follow you?
On Twitter @Warren Davidson, on our official page, davidson.house.gov.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Join us next time on our semi-regular podcast. What's the Big's idea? Warren, I'll see you on the floor.
Take care.